The aircraft carrier USS Hornet Museum is a national treasure, having participated in two of the greatest events of the 20th century, World War II and the Apollo 11 manned space mission. Now peacefully moored at the historic Alameda Point and San Francisco Bay, the historic USS Hornet is a timeless memorial to those who defended our American values and to those who pursued America's technological advancements. USS Hornet is a United States Navy aircraft carrier, an Essex class, the 8th ship to bear the name. Construction started in August 1942, and Hornet was commissioned in November 1943. After 3 months of training, she joined the U.S. forces in the Pacific War. She played a major part in the Pacific battles of World War II, and also took part in Operation Magic Carpet, returning troops back to the U.S. Following World War II, she served in the Korean War, Vietnam War, and also played a key part in the Apollo space program, recovering astronauts as they returned from the moon. Hornet was finally decommissioned in 1970. She was eventually designated a National Historic Landmark, and in 1998 she opened to the public as the USS Hornet Museum in Alameda, California.
Hello there and welcome. I have two more interesting, I'm telling you, this program has the most interesting people on it. And tonight it's retired Navy. I have Max Branscomb. Thank you for coming, Max.
You're welcome, Bobbi.
And Stephen Robinson. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
And I was fortunate enough to be on the Hornet with these gentlemen. They actually dragged me through it. That was quite an experience for these poor gentlemen. It was very, very interesting. And tell our viewers what your relationship is with the Hornet, Max.
Well, I was a Navy pilot, and my tour on the Hornet was as a ship's company officer. Mm-hmm. And I spent a 2-year tour there, and I flew, my only flying was the ship's only airplane was the mail plane. We called it the COD, Carrier On-Board Delivery. Mm-hmm. So I flew that airplane. My primary job was in the Combat Information Center, in the anti-air warfare officer, and I was also the radar piloting officer, and plus other duties that a normal ship officer does. So that was.
But that's a big ship.
Well, it's a very big ship. It was a first-of-the-line warship in World War II. But by the time I got aboard, why, it was on its last. It was, in fact, turned out to be one of its last tours before it was retired and became a museum.
Now, Steve, what did you do?
Well, I was a boiler tender on the USS Bonhammer Shard, same class carrier as the Hornet. The boiler tenders, of course, tended the boilers. Mm-hmm. And so needless to say, it was quite hot down there. I did a couple different jobs down there. The basic one I did was what they called water tender. Mm-hmm. So you watch the level of the water in the boilers. But I also did some interesting things like smoke watch, which was up on the island, telling the different fire rooms if they were smoking, because of course you don't want the planes to land with smoke in their face. Mm-hmm. And so I did that for a while, where I really had my most fun.
Well, it's a fascinating thing to be on there because the enormity of it, it makes you feel so tiny. And I remember, Max, when I talked to you about the first time, you said someone told you had to go land on an aircraft carrier, mm-hmm. and you were way up in the sky, and you looked down, and that tiny little pin that was little black square was what they expected you to land your plane on.
That's right.
So it gives you, when you're down there, you think, how could anyone think this is small as you look around? But how did you survive on that? Because it's very steely. I mean, it's very encapsulated. Mm-hmm.
Well, you get, it was huge, so you had no claustrophobia problem, because my stateroom was probably about the size of the set we're sitting on, or the three of us here. It was not very large.
Did you say you had no claustrophobia problem?
No.
I happened to go to the brig with you, too. That's a claustrophobia.
Well, I didn't spend any time in the brig, Bobbi, but except when I went down there with you.
Well, it's nice that the commander doesn't do that.
But the brig was not one of the more popular places. But the hangar deck and the flight deck, there was plenty of fresh air. lots of food, and as compared to other ships, it was quite roomy. And, so it was very enjoyable. And there was, as far as life itself, there was everything that you would need was there. You know, a place to sleep, a place to eat, a store to buy things, and if you're ill, there was a hospital, and there was a laundry, and there was a bakery, and it was just had everything you needed, except there's no place to hang out and meet girls, and there was no no tavern or disco. But other than that, it was just like any American city.
Sure, just up on the flight deck with a little wind in your hair. Okay, how long were you out for? That's what I thought of the whole time we were down there. You took me down below in all the compartments that are very compartmentalized and very dark, and you go in and in and in and in. But
and down.
And down and down and down. How long were your trips or your tours? You know, I'm probably not using it right.
I'm not sure about the Hornets. We did 3, as we called them, cruises over off of Nam. Each line period is what they called each time the carrier was off of Nam. Varied, usually a couple of weeks at the very least. We did one time when we spent, I think, it was 3 weeks off of Nam. The North Koreans shot down one of our planes. We had to go directly. We pulled into the Philippines for our relaxation. We were there 3 hours, and they called us back on. We went out to Korea, floated around off of there for about another 3 weeks, and went directly off to Nam again. So we were out there for about a month, a little bit more than a month without coming back in the land. That was about the longest time we were out at sea. But like he said, it's virtually a little city. It's 3,500 men, that's including the air crew. And there's about 1,500 ship's company. The air crew adds on to that. And we had a TV, they had, we could watch movies, they had a radio station with DJs and stuff. We could hear all kinds of music. If they weren't flying planes, you could go up and run around the flight deck so you could exercise. And it was very nice. That was the only good thing I got out of the Navy that I wanted was a carrier.
A carrier. Well, and how do you feel, just real quickly, like in a 30-second, 45-second synopsis, how do you feel it made you the person you are today?
Well, it basically made me grow up. This is one of the, as you can see, it's marked, main steam line, 600 pounds. If this was the bust while you're down here, you're dead. Toast. In the fire room, they said we had 12 seconds if you got a minor thing to get up and get out of the thing, but you'd never make it. They say actually the safest thing to do is to go down to the bilges, because of course steam and hot air rise. They say that, we never had the problem, but they say that if you got a pinhole leak in one of these things, and you took and raised your hand across it to see where it was, it'd take your fingers off. So they said if you ever had one, you take a broom, and you could hear it. I mean, it would be just piercing, of course. You would see the humidity and stuff. You couldn't actually see it, but, and so that's that. I went out of high school. I didn't really have good grades to go to college, so I went to the, as I always say, the University of the Navy. But it helped me grow up. It changed my way of thinking on a lot of things. It made me proud of what I did, and if I had to do it all over again, I would do the same, and without any problems whatsoever.
Very good. And how about you?
Well, it was, of course, a long-time aspiration. I'd grown up watching the Tuskegee Airmen and the World War II movies. And I said, man, that's got to be a fun thing to do. And to actually get aboard the ship and actually do it was wonderful. And the senior officers, there were still some World War II guys left there. And the stories that they told were just, to me, marvelous. But the main thing was the responsibility you had. I showed you in the CIC when you were down there, I was the radar piloting officer, where you actually had control of the ship, giving the engine and rudder orders, and that was pretty heady for a country boy to sit down in the bowels of the ship and steer it. That plus just coming aboard the ship and Do I have another 10 seconds?
10 seconds.
I think every American boy and man and woman should be a Navy pilot for at least one tour. You'll view life differently thereafter.
The Admiral, of course, spent a lot of time with us because this is where all of the battle could be seen. You can't see it from up above. And that was his space back there. We call it flag plot. And he actually had 2 stars on the door there. And I very rarely had occasion to go back there. When they wanted anything from me, he always came out here. And so he would hang around up there. But during the air thing, why he would frequently come down and look at one of the scopes. And these were air control scopes because they have the little joysticks here, and you can move the cursor around and maneuver them much differently. The surface search, of course, they're closer in, and they have wheels on them as kind of the only difference. Back there, back behind Bobbi is that's the air control section, and on either side of the scopes are the height finding radars. And we had special radars up on the antenna, special antennas up on the mast that we could determine the incoming aircraft's height. And supposedly this is where the air control supervisor sat, but like everybody else, I mostly walked around. I found that if you walk around and carry a piece of paper, why people leave you alone. But
take long to find out. Huh?
Over here is we call it it's a vertical plot, and it's the air picture, and typically it was set at a 200-mile range, and you notice that behind it you can get behind it, and the radarman would be behind there with a sound-powered telephone, talking to one of the search operators here. And he would periodically, every 3 minutes or so, plot a new position. And see, this is written from behind. And then he writes backwards. And so that he's not standing out in front of it to write it. So he's back there, so you always have an unobstructed view. And these are what we call these things tote boards. And that's just where there's information about various conditions and frequencies and things like that. Events and call signs, I don't remember exactly what all was on these tote boards, but they were kept up so that you could see what was going on. When we made one of our jobs was to make a Sea of Japan transit every time we went to the Western Pacific, and that was to assert our right to go up and to operate in the Sea of Japan between the Soviet Union and Japan. And whenever a carrier would run in there, of course, that was the Russians kind of think that's their lake, and they would have multiple flyovers of the carrier. And the reason we had those 4A4s on board was so we could intercept them and escort them. So anytime a Russian plane flew past one of our carriers, he would be escorted. However, the one day in the Sea of Japan, we had 55 overflights. They weren't 55 different airplanes necessarily, but they would go back and come back because we'd seen the same aircraft twice. But we had fighters from all the Air Force bases in Japan, any other carriers in the area, and everything. And so the board was all full of contacts. And then we could actually run out to the side of our bridge or go up onto the flight deck and watch them fly by. And so that was kind of interesting. During the Vietnam War, when we were on Yankee Station, since we didn't ever move anywhere, why, rather than having this being a moving plot, our guys actually drew in the coast of North Vietnam and all the rivers, and then Hainan Island up here. And so that's why the Admiral hung out down here, because this is where it was happening.
Well, thank you both for coming on. I was raised by an Army lieutenant colonel, so they get you grounded. They definitely military ground you. But I thank you both for what you did out there, you know, keeping our country free, land of the free, home of the brave. I mean, I always say, you know, America is nothing quite like it. All you have to do is travel the world to find out just how special we have it. And thank you very much for coming in and sharing these moments with these gentlemen.
For more information on the USS Hornet Museum, call 510-521-8448 or visit the website at www.uss-hornet.org.
Today, Sotheby's International Realty, bringing new technology to a 200-year-old tradition while serving the San Francisco Peninsula, Silicon Valley, and clientele worldwide.